Hey everybody, I'm Dave with Growing the Home Garden. One of the things that you're thinking about in the fall is how can I sustain my plants so that they will grow successfully next year? You don't necessarily want to plant something and then have it just die in the wintertime unless it's an annual and that's what it does. But there's a lot of plants like this rosemary right here, which is what we're going to talk about today, that can be sustained year after year after year if you give them the right growing conditions. So that's what we're going to talk about. First off, what are the right growing conditions for a rosemary plant? I've got mine right here in front of a brick wall, and we've got it mulched, and there is a bit of a grade from the plant going down. And part of that is to help create better drainage. But we also have it sited in a location that's going to get a little bit more heat in the wintertime. And the reason I planted it here like this is because rosemary is a Mediterranean type of herb. It grows into a shrub. It can get really good size, but it likes those conditions that are a little bit drier. It doesn't enjoy having wet roots or wet feet. So you want to have good drainage on it. So really the first step in overwintering rosemary is making sure you have it planted in the right place to begin with. So you want to look for a location that's got good drainage. Maybe you've got a little bit of a heat sink like brick or stone or a sidewalk nearby, or even closer up to a house. I had a beautiful rosemary plant for several years, and then the area started to get more shady as more trees that we planted grew, and it did not dry out. It was on the north side of a house, and the roots just started getting way too wet. And as they got too wet, the plant just did not do well. And one year when it got really cold, it did not come back. Now, another thing with rosemary is if you select the right varieties, they can be a lot more cold hardy. This particular one is called ARP. And ARP is well known as being a more cold hardy, more heat tolerant variety in a lot of ways. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. It is just a tougher plant than your ordinary straight species rosemary. Now, if you followed me for any length of time here on Growing the Home Garden, you probably know I do a lot of plant propagation, and I really love doing that. That's the other way I like to preserve my rosemary for over the winter time. Essentially, I make a backup copy. These are going to be clones of the original plant, so I'm just going to trim off some of these taller pieces here. This is the ARP rosemary, just like that. And you can watch the actual video on plant propagation where I talk about two different methods of it. And I'm just going to stick them into this mixture here. I'm doing something a little different with these particular ones. I've got these little 4-inch pots with 3 different layers in them. The bottom layer is garden soil, the middle layer is wood chips, and the top layer is, I believe it's paver sand this time. You can use paver sand, you can use play sand. There's a lot of different options for the sand type. So I am just going to stick each of these cuttings, and that will give me some backup copies in case this doesn't work out. I'm going to keep these indoors, let them root inside, and then in the spring I should be able to plant them outdoors. And while I'm growing them, I can pinch them back on occasion and use that little pinch off part in the kitchen to season our dishes. So I'm going to do the ARP, and I'm going to do this other one, which is called Torrentius. So we'll get a few of each of those. Just like that, we'll do 4 of each, and hopefully all 4 of them will grow really well in the spring of next year. Very easy to do. Whoops, until you break one like that. We will go ahead and root the bottom part that I did not mangle. Just like that. Now I can keep this indoors. It looks great, and we'll have some cuttings that'll root for next year. Now another potential option is to use something like this. This is a row cover, and you can just simply, at the coldest times of the year, come over and give your plants a nice little covering to protect them. Make sure that you have something really ingenious like a rock to pin it down so the wind doesn't blow it away. And what this does is it creates an air pocket underneath this blanket, which will allow a little bit of heat to be retained right around the plant and keep it from blowing away. So that it has a better chance. And I would only do this on the coldest nights, the coldest days that you have in the wintertime, where you're getting a combination of cold and wetness. Or some really, really cold temperatures. Like we had, I think, a -5 this past winter. So it probably would have been a good idea to come out here and protect this just a little bit. Now, row covers are made from a light, almost cloth-like mesh here. You can kind of see through it a little bit. And if you need to, you can always double it over if you're concerned that this isn't thick enough. Just do an extra layer. But what you want to avoid is using plastic to cover your plants and directly touching the foliage, because what ends up happening is that the cold will transfer right through plastic and go onto the leaves, and it does absolutely no good if they are touching. So if you do have to use plastic, make sure you're tenting it in some way by putting up some sort of a structure over top of your plant. You can use a lot of different things, wire hangers bent over. You could use pots, different things that are big enough to cover the whole plant. And these are just temporary things to cover on those really, really cold days. Now, pots can be a good option too sometimes. If you do bring it indoors in a pot, you want to make sure that you are allowing the pot to dry out between waterings, because rosemary, again, does not like wet feet, so you need to accommodate it. The other thing you could do is pot it up into a container that you can put into your garage or a shed somewhere. Just make sure you keep it a little bit moist over the winter every now and then, because it will dry out, and they do need moisture even in the winter time when they're not actively growing. They still will need some of that, but you don't want to get them overly wet. But you can keep them sheltered indoors in the garage or in a shed, and even in the house. Just keep in mind that it may not ideally love those conditions, but in the spring it could bounce back just fine. In fact, it probably will bounce back just fine. So I don't plan on potting up any of my plants here and bringing them indoors. I think I've got them in a pretty good location. They're sited where they've got a bit of a slope coming down into the yard itself, so they aren't going to get a whole lot of standing drainage right here in this location. I've got them mulched for some heat protection. These are just some wood chips on the top layer. Now in the back over here, we've got this nice brick wall, and that brick wall is going to absorb the heat during the day from the sunlight, and then at night it's going to release it, and that's going to keep this area a little bit more of a heat zone than other areas of the yard would be. So it's an ideal condition for this. Now, speaking of this, here's a tip for you that may actually work. If you've got some rocks, pavers, stones, things that can absorb it, you've got this little high-tech solution right here of a rock. Put it around your rosemary plants in a little bit of a ring, just temporarily for the winter time, where it can absorb that heat and then release it at night to help your rosemary buffer those really cold days and those cold nights in the middle of December and January. And for us, February tends to be one of the worst months. And that may help it get just enough to get through the winter time. So let me ask you a question. Have you tried overwintering rosemary in your growing zone? And if so, would you put that in the comments? Just tell us what zone you're growing in and if it was successful or if you had difficulties. I'd love to hear about how it works out in different areas of the country. We are in Tennessee, so we are in a Zone 7 area. We have winters that tend to be pretty mild overall. Usually we're in the 50s somewhere for highs during the day, and sometimes the upper 40s. Every now and then we have about a week or so where it gets really cold, and we might even get a snow every now and then, but they're usually not significant and they kind of disappear very quickly. So that's a little bit about our area. I'd love to hear about yours and how your rosemary does. But I'm Dave with Growing the Home Garden. If this was helpful to you in any way, please hit the like button and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time on Growing the Home Garden. Thanks for watching.